Thank you very much, Lloyd, for the kind introduction. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here with you today. I've actually never been part of this group here, the genealogy group, even though I'm quite interested in genealogy. So I pledge to do a little bit better and maybe join you guys, if I'm welcome after this talk still, to learn a little bit how you do genealogy and maybe listen to some of the other presentations. Am I too fast?
Slow down.
Okay, I'll try that. I'm a fast speaker, so I'll try to slow a little bit down, but anyway. What brought me to America? So I want to talk a little bit about that. At the same time, I want to introduce my family is right over there. So they have been to Germany many times, so we're definitely a German-American family. We visit Germany a lot, so my family, my mom and my brother are still there, so I'm still very much connected to Germany, and actually I'm going back to Germany in a week to my mom's 90th birthday, which will be on April 7th. I looked back a little bit and learned quite a bit about myself during the preparation, about my area and things like that, because growing up, you're often not that interested in that kind of stuff, right? But it was nice to learn a little bit about that. And I found, even as a little kid, that's me, probably 9 years old, I was already kind of interested in the American way of life, right? We pretended a lot to be cowboys and actually wrote cowboy stories. We loved to watch Westerns back in the 70s and early 80s. Western movies were really popular. And, my brother and I wrote our own Western stories, 5-page kind of little stories. And then we read them to whoever was interested, mostly our parents, I guess, and maybe some aunts read those stories to them, and that's me reading one of those Western stories dressed up as a little cowboy there. That's my family. They're right over there here in the US now. We had some additions during COVID. Got a cat and a dog, Noki and Josie, but just a little bit about who we are right now, and then I'll go back a little bit in the history of how I grew up in Germany. And so there's Amy, Devin, Jaden, and Julian right here. Noki and Josie are not here today. Maybe we'll bring them some other time. I have my mom still in Germany. My dad passed away last year at the age of 92. Unfortunately, so I was there for his funeral, and I still have a brother in Germany as well. What do we like to do as a family? So we do really a lot of activities together with our kids. And we all enjoy traveling, which was not really possible too much over the last couple years, unfortunately. But I did go back to Germany, even during COVID, 2 times. Personally, I like the outdoors a lot. I like hiking. We do cooking, baking, and things like that. But I want to talk to you a little bit more about where I'm from. I'm from the southwest of Germany, and that's kind of a historic view a little bit, right? This is how Germany was. It wasn't really Germany back then, right? Even though the Romans called it Germania, right? That was like 2,000 years ago, and there's an overlay of the current German map with the ones from 2,000 years ago, right? So my part where I grew up here in the southwest of Germany was actually part of the Roman Empire, whereas the part where Stefan will talk about, right, that was called Germania Magnum. It was not part of the Roman Empire, right? So my part where I'm from was very, very much influenced by the Romans, and you can still see that today. There's like old Roman castles, fragments of that, Roman roads and things like that, but they are not really present in that part of the Germany. But down here, there were Roman cities that are more than 2,000 years old. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that. They actually built this limes here, this wall to kind of prevent the intrusion of the barbarians into the Roman Empire. It was largely like a wooden wall. In some cases, it was like stone walls and all that. Kind of primitive, but this went almost through all of Europe, right? But despite that, there was a lot of trade going on back and forth. So the Roman influence was even felt in the upper part of what's now Germany. an old Roman road actually goes right through the town I'm growing up. So there's some remnants there, also of a small fort, right? And a lot of this stuff was built out of wood back then. So it's hard to delineate sometimes, but they know it was there, right? It's just not that much left of it. But a lot of interesting history there. I'm from Heidelberg, Germany, which is in the southwest of Germany, right here. Okay, maybe you need a map for that. It's like an hour south of Frankfurt. I usually, when I go back home, I fly into Frankfurt Airport. Takes me about an hour drive down to Heidelberg. That's where my parents are. And it's really close to France, maybe half an hour to get to the Alsace region there, and about an hour and a half, 2 hours to get to Switzerland. So, also correct, and sometimes when people don't know here in the US, if I say I'm from Heidelberg, it's like, where is that? I say I'm from the south or from the southwest, or I'm from Baden-Württemberg, or, I'm really from the Baden part of Baden-Württemberg. And also correct is like I'm from the Upper Rhine Valley, because the Rhine River is like 3 miles away or something like that from where I grew up. Black Forest is like maybe half an hour away to the south, Frankfurt. And the town I grew up in is right between Mannheim and Karlsruhe, if anybody knows that. It's also near France and Switzerland. And sometimes they call it the California of Germany because it's in the southwest, and it also has the best weather of Germany. It's the hottest climate in Germany in the Rhine Valley. I'm not from Berlin, just to point that out. Berlin is kind of the other end of Germany. Even though Kennedy might have been a Berliner, I'm not. Okay, I'm from Heidelberg, so a couple of pictures about Heidelberg. I'm actually born right next to the castle. There used to be a small hospital right next to the castle, which they later moved, because it was somewhat inconvenient, because it's like almost a little bit in the mountains, right? Have to get up there, and it was kind of smallish, so they moved that to the other side of the Neckar River. It's a little close-up of the Heidelberg Castle. We have been there multiple times. It was built medieval times and destroyed a couple times. Most of the destruction was like when the French invaded in the late 1600s. So it's kind of a ruin, but they built it up to some degree. So it's still a tourist destination, and we've been up there with my family a couple times. This is from the other side, what they call the Philosophenweg. If you have ever been there, other side of the Neckar River, have a really nice view of Heidelberg. And there's quite a few movies and poems and songs written. There's this song in a movie called Ich hab mein Herz in Heidelberg verloren, which means I lost my heart in Heidelberg. There's a lot of, in the romantic area, people really like the town of Heidelberg. And interestingly, right, a lot of cities in World War II in Germany were destroyed. Hamburg, right, your hometown, was largely destroyed. Mannheim, which is really close to Heidelberg, was destroyed. Cologne and Dresden and all that. But the Allies didn't throw any bombs on Heidelberg because they said, after the war, we want to live there. And that's exactly what they did. There's Mark Twain Village, there's Patrick Henry Village. They constructed these villages in and around Heidelberg for Americans to live after the war there. There was an American hospital and all that, right? And they have left since in the 90s or so. Yeah, Heidelberg, fortunately, is different than some other towns in Germany because they were rebuilt in the 1950s. There's still a lot of old buildings in the town of Heidelberg. Now, I really, when we went over there, sometimes I thought, why don't we stay here? But then, Julian and the family said, no way, right? So we had to go back. So we came back to America every time. Another town that's really close to where I grew up, maybe 6-7 miles from my hometown, is Speyer. Very old town. This was a Roman camp as early as 10 BC. The city is over 2,000 years old. And there's a really impressive dome or cathedral in Speyer in the Romanesque kind of building style, which was built by the Salian Franks around 1000. So this dome is more than 1,000 years old and has a lot of the Roman emperors from the Holy Roman Empire inside the cathedral. There's a crypt underneath where the bodies are kind of still preserved. So where exactly did I grow up? Talked a bit about that, state of Baden-Württemberg, near Heidelberg, but the town I really grew up is called Waghäusel, and the village that's part of Waghäusel is called Killach. Hard to pronounce, my wife always say Killach, like it sounds like killer or something like that, but it's Killach, and it's a unique name. I think it only exists once in the world, unlike a lot of other towns. Heidelberg's probably you find 20 times in the US. That's really unique, and it's located in the Rhine Valley, which is this valley here, maybe 4 or 5 miles to the left and the right of the Rhine. Ancient times, the land kind of separated, and it's a very flat area here. So that's kind of where I'm from, close to Black Forest, close to the Vosges Mountains. Palatinate is here, Alps down here. And if you're ignorant, everything that's kind of not the south, they call the fish cup, right? That means like the fish heads. Everything that's, because we don't have any ocean down here. It's all mountains and landlocked area, right? So north is where you get the other talk later from Stefan. Few words about the village that I grew up. Just 10,000 souls nowadays. And when I was a kid, it was only 9,000, right? So it's growing. This is the town from the satellite. It's we call it a clearing island. Maybe a couple hundred years ago, this was all woods, all woodland here. And then they started to build a church in the middle and houses. Maybe they cleared a little bit for fields and agriculture. And it grew, right? But even today, it's still kind of a clearing island, completely surrounded by woods in every direction, which is kind of nice, right? You leave the town a little bit and you're in the woods. There's trails in there and all that. I kind of miss that because you can really go around the city and you never leave the woods. Very nice. It was first mentioned in 1234, so it might be older than that, the town, and it was part of Speyer, which had a bishop, and the bishop pretty much owned that land, even though it's on the other side of the Rhine River, but it was part of the Speyer diocese. The name Kirch in medieval German means little church in the woods, and that's what it was back then. Historically, it was a rather poor area. The soil in the Rhine Valley is really poor. It's sandy soil. Not much grows there until you really heavily fertilize it. So the people were very poor in that area for a long time. Medieval times, dominated by small block agriculture. Maybe they could grow potatoes and later tobacco. But it's really well known for growing white asparagus nowadays and sugar beets as well. And that brought actually a lot of jobs in the 1800s. They built our first beet sugar factory, one of the oldest beet sugar factories in Europe, in Waghäusel. That's the plant probably in the 1980s, 90s had looked like. And it was sometimes hard when I grew up to drive on the roads. In some parts of the year when all these sugar beets were delivered, because there was like tractor after tractor after tractor, sugar beets coming from the whole hinterland, around Waghäusel, and you were behind those, and they were driving really closely. It's like almost in Pennsylvania when you're behind these buggies, right? You're not making any progress. But they basically, when there was harvest time, they created this huge mountain of sugar beets there. It was really a mountain, and they would process those sugar beets throughout the year, but the harvest, it would be delivered within, a month or something like that. That plant closed in 1995. And interesting, what you see here, there's like a little castle in the middle of that plant, right? Which was built prior to the plant. And also, nowadays, now that they closed the sugar plant around it, they restored that castle, which in medieval times was used to hunt, right? The princes and kings would use that as like a station, you know, to stay there for a weekend or a week and do the hunting of deer and things like that. So they restored that, and there's like a lot of social, like cultural activities now, singing and stuff like that. So that's quite nice. Another activity that brought jobs and starting in the 1800s was cigar making, because they could grow tobacco in that area, and a lot of people found jobs in making cigars from that tobacco. Even in the early 20th century, a lot of people were still working to do this manual job of making cigars in my hometown. And there's like little museums where you can actually observe that even to the day. How did they do that? There's a lot of tools and things like that. Interesting fact, I actually found this book in the DSB library, which is, I'm still amazed about. And it's like Kirlach, wie es früher einmal war. Kirlach, how it was, you know, in the past. You know, there's a lot of pictures in there. I had the book with me and all that. But there's not a lot of books in this library about small towns in Germany. In this, I mean, it might be the only one. It's from my hometown. I was really amazed about that. Anyway, another interesting fact about Kirlach is that Bertha Benz drove the very first car through Kirlach on the very first road trip ever, right? That's pretty amazing. That's the very first car. We looked at it, I think, when we were in Germany. There's like a restored version of that. You can still look at the museum, the Karl Benz Patentmotorwagen. Karl Benz didn't drive it, right? He probably was in his workshop and doing his engineering stuff. But his wife, Bertha, drove it on a road trip from Mannheim to her hometown, Pforzheim, in 1888. And there were no gas stations, right? So she had to go to the pharmacies, and this one is in Wiesloch, the very first gas station in the world. They had ethanol and other spirits that they could put in the car to drive it, but that's how she got the gas. It was about 104-kilometer road trip from Mannheim to Pforzheim and back. And some years ago, they made this the Bertha Benz Memorial Route, so you can drive it with your own car. This actually goes right by my mom's house. So she was right next to that route. A couple more modern pictures of my hometown. That's the Catholic Church. This is an old tavern, which is a liquor license since 1700. Continuous operations, still can get your wine there next to the church. This is the old school. There's also a new school, but it's still in operation. People who worked in the fields were outside of town. So you had to walk there or take a bike or something like that. And there's a field cross there. I think it's kind of their place to take their lunch, right? But they braid at the same time there, and that's still there out where the fields are. A lot of towns had that. They had like a field cross, right? Out where they did their daily manual labor in the fields. They took their breaks near a cross to worship at the same time. And that's a picture of this cemetery where I buried my dad last year. Very important also, and I'm very interested in that part as well, is the language that we speak in the Southwest can be very different than other areas of Germany, and northern Germany maybe especially. I found when I talked to some Amish people in Pennsylvania, for example, that they speak a very similar dialect. I can almost communicate in my dialect of the South with them, because that's where they came from, right? They came from the Alsace region, from what's now Baden-Württemberg, and from Switzerland. There's a couple examples, right? Kindskinder, for example. No normal person in Germany would say that. They call it Enkel, that's your grandchildren, but we say Kindskinder, which literally means the child of the child, right? Grumbeere is potato, but Northern Germans wouldn't say that. They would say Kartoffel, not Grumbeere. It's a very different word. There's a couple other examples for that, and some short words can have like Rotznase is like a naughty child sometimes. It also means running nose, so it's quite interesting. And Baden-Württemberg, which is, they're kind of proud of being technologically advanced. They kind of one of the highest GDPs in the country or so. The industry is pretty good, but they had this slogan for the last 25 years or so. We know how to do anything besides from speaking proper German. We can't do that. So another aspect of culture is the food in the Southwest, and I grew up with all those foods. Some of them are really, I think, very regional and local to the Southwest. Like this is a very famous dish called Schupfnudel. It's kind of a potato pasta type, a little bit like gnocchi in Italy, but different than that. And Dampfnudel is a very famous dish, Wurstsalat or Wellfleisch or Apfelküchle, or this is an onion pie, and the Pfälzer Saumagen, Wurstsuppe, and asparagus, as I mentioned, is very popular. The season, I just talked to my mom earlier, she said the season is just starting, kind of today, right? They're starting to harvest the white asparagus this week or so. Still very expensive, probably in a week or two, prices will drop as the yields go up and things like that. Most women I wrote here are really great home cooks in my region, good bakers too, and I always saw, when I grew up, they really teach you, they exchange recipes, and that's really part of the culture. Coffee and cake is very important, especially on weekends, but nowadays even more often it's kind of a fourth meal, and people get together and talk and exchange what happened and stuff like that. What's also, I think, characteristic, because this was historically a very poor area, they tend to use cheap ingredients like potatoes or apples or onions and things like that. But some of the dishes are rather labor intensive and they take like all morning to make, right? They had time, but they didn't have money to buy meat and things like that. Fasching is another very important cultural time, it's kind of a fifth season, people sometimes say it. What's interesting, we have like two types of Fasching in Germany, like the Rhenish and the Alemannic style. Alemannic is more kind of influenced from Switzerland and the southern area, and then there's the Rhenish, which is more the Cologne, Mainz. We are kind of at the border of the two, and we actually have both styles. So this is more the Alemannic, they have the wooden masks and things like that, and this is more the Rhenish style. So that's very important. Unfortunately, the last 2 or 3 years I couldn't have it, right, because of COVID. That's me. A little bit about my family. I grew up with my parents, one brother, grandma on my mom's side. I had several aunts, uncles, cousins. My mom and my dad, they married their kids rather late, so 3 of my grandparents had already passed at that time. So I didn't have an awfully big family. That's my mom and I. After I was born, that's my grandma. And just a little bit about my parents. My mom was born in 1932. Her parents had a bakery store in Killach. They made like breads, rolls, and cakes, things like that. And later she worked in the export department of the doll company Schildkröd. She exported a lot of the products of the company, these dolls, all around the world, and she had to communicate in a lot of different languages with her customers, mostly writing. My dad was born in 1929, and his parents had a corner store, delivered milk and things like that, and later he was an analyst for the US Army in Frankfurt, Mannheim, Kaiserslautern, but he never actually went to the US. Neither of my parents left Europe. They traveled quite a bit, but exclusively in Europe. He had really a passion for sports. He was the president of his bowling club for many years, and actually in the 80s he hosted and organized the German and World Championship in his hometown in Kegeln, which is a German kind of bowling. A little bit about growing up in the 70s and 80s. I look back to that time and really enjoy thinking about it, but I also have to say my parents grew up very differently. They were kids during World War II, so they were rather poor, sometimes didn't have enough to eat, especially my mom. But they also experienced what we call the Wirtschaftswunder in the 50s, kind of the economic expansion after World War II. There was a lot of prosperity created, the Americans helped with that, Marshall Plan and all that. So they definitely were also well, very much influenced to that. Culturally, I think my generation, my parents were quite different. You know, they listened more to Volksmusik and Schlager and also classical music and operas, whereas we kids, we were more into pop and rock and things like that. Some examples. Yeah, there was a lot of bands in the 80s that were part of the new German wave kind of music, things like that. So that was interesting. We spent a lot of time outside. Pretty much every day went outside, played soccer. But we also, you know, in the 80s had the first video games, and I played table tennis and was also doing a lot of camping with the scouts. So that was fun. I thought I'd bring this up briefly. I did a little bit of my own genealogy research. So I can trace some of my ancestors back to the early 1600s, so like 1620 on some lineages. Other lineages I did out earlier, things like that. But I did that, you know, I think during COVID a little bit. I got interested in that. It's actually pretty impressive what kind of data you can find, right? Sometimes a church burned down and the data just disappeared, right? But there's quite a bit of data that allows you to track your lineage back to for 8 generations or something like that. So let's see. That was one of the questions I think Lloyd gave me. Did your grandparents grow up near you? They did. Not exactly in the same town. I would say within a circle of maybe 15, 20 miles. They did. They came from different towns, which did not happen before my grandparents, because when I did the genealogy research, people just married in the same town for hundreds and hundreds of years. They all came from Killach. You know, they married each other. Very rare that they married just a town over, which is like 3 miles away, right? So that only happened, I think, starting in the 20th century, that people actually moved around. And I did a little bit of DNA-based, this is the estimate, and that's impressive. You know, supposedly I'm 98% Germanic, and you know, the DNA research tells me exactly where I know I'm from, so that's pretty impressive. But you know, I'm also 2% Welsh. I'm not sure if I believe that, but that's what it says. Anyway, schooling. I went to Catholic kindergarten at age 3, so 6, it's kind of preschool. Then to elementary school for 4 years in Killach. Then I went to high school, Copernicus Gymnasium in a neighboring town. I had to take the bus until 13th grade. And then I went to University of Karlsruhe and studied chemistry and chemical engineering, get my master's there. And then I did a PhD at the Research Center in Karlsruhe, which was, for a long time, was a nuclear research center. They pretty much had any kind of nuclear reactor you could think of. And a lot of the research went into commercial reactors, nuclear power plants in Germany. But that type of research changed and to a lot of other research areas as Germany was kind of getting away from nuclear power generation. So I lived in Karlsruhe for a couple years to do my master's and PhD. This is a rather new town, only established 1715, about 300,000 people. Nice castle, and that town name means kind of, the peace for Karl, who was kind of the king of Baden at the time. So he founded the town of Karlsruhe. We have been there several times. Another thing is a little bit about the religious background of my area. So Christianity clearly is the largest religion in Germany, but there's a little statistical map here. That's where I'm from. Green is kind of Catholic dominated, blues Protestant dominated, and you see here is the former GDR, which because of the communism, the majority of people there are a-religious, right? They're atheists or non-religious or whatever you want to call it. That's the majority here. So that history is still reflected nowadays. In my area down here is actually a lot of fragmentation. One town might be dominated Catholic, neighboring town might be dominated Protestant, and that is all related to the history. In the medieval times and a little after that, you had the religion, whatever the prince or the king where you lived in your little kingdom, what religion they adopted for everyone that lived in their kingdom, so you didn't really have a choice. But anyway, so my hometown Killach was mostly Catholic. We went to church on most Sundays, often in a town over because we were like unruly kids, and we were usually late, and my parents were like embarrassed that let's not go to Kellogg's church, let's go to Wiesenthal, and if you guys are like loud and stuff like that, at least they don't know us there. My first Holy Communion, I was maybe around, it was probably 10 or 11. It was a really big deal. Kind of everybody came, all the relatives, and we got a lot of presents and money and all. That was a really big deal at the time. That's a picture of me and my brother on that day of my Holy Communions. We were all dressed up, we went to church, and all that kind of stuff. So how did I come to America? So of course I went to Hamburg and took the ship and stuff like that. Okay, no, I'm kidding. That's me here. No, actually I came, first time I came, I was in 97 at age 27. I was offered an internship by the German company Bayer in Leverkusen, and they had a subsidiary in Pittsburgh, so I worked there for 5 months. And but after that, that was the first time I really got to know the US, and I traveled quite a bit during the internship too. Every weekend I went to explore the US. It was a lot of fun. But then I went back to Germany to finish my degrees in Karlsruhe. And after my PhD, I was 32, and I was offered a postdoc position by DuPont for a year. So I didn't plan really to stay longer than that, but I thought it would be another interesting experience before I go back to Germany. So the week after I got my PhD, I arrived in Philadelphia. It was just 2 suitcases. Came just by myself. But I knew a few people who also came from Germany that worked at DuPont already, actually from the same city, Karlsruhe. So that helped tremendously. Otherwise, I would have been really lost. Bought a really old Ford Bronco, then lived at Top of the Hill Apartments of Silverside Road for a year, and worked at the experimental station in Wilmington for a few years. And there's a lot more to say, but I want to finish up. So how did you learn about the Sängerbund? I actually, because there were a lot of German colleagues at DuPont, right, they took us to like, oh, let's go to the Sängerbund, there's Oktoberfest, right? But they were not necessarily members. So I came to the Oktoberfest like every year, right from the get-go. But initially I didn't really feel a need to join the club. So I didn't join the club right away because I went back to Germany like twice a year. Sometimes I had a business trip to go back to Europe, or sometimes I just to see friends and all that. And also I had quite a few colleagues from Germany at DuPont, so that helped. But then when we had kids, things changed, right? I really wanted them to also experience a little bit of the German culture, and since there was an offering of German language for kids and all that, that's kind of when we joined as a family. It was like in November 2007, and we've been members ever since, and my kids have gone to German school at some point. Also went